Hello and welcome to the Special Response Diver Podcast. I'm Jordan Harvell, your host, and I am so excited that you are here. This podcast is brought to you by Special Response Diving International, where we know the challenges public safety divers face underwater. That's why we've created training and resources that can help them in any scenario they encounter so that every dive is safe and successful. Michael, welcome back to the podcast.
It's good to be back. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. Today we're going to be talking about why dive teams fail and why they just can't seem to get momentum or keep momentum. What is that?
The mission has to come first. What are we going to accomplish? What are we aiming for? And how are we going to get there and stay there? If you're a city or a county that has a lot of water, you need a dive team. You don't need to be waiting and saying, well, we can't afford a dive team. No, we need a dive capability, even if it's only 2 divers. Okay, but you need a dive capability. And when you establish that mission, you project to everybody in the area and in the state and what have you, our dive team is here for this purpose because our mission is to A, B, C, D, E. And that's how you start a dive team. Then after you start the dive team with a mission, you haven't started the team yet, then you've got to put the numbers together. You got to, it's called formation. You've got to where's the money going to come from? Who's going to support this? How many do we need? What's the equipment going to cost? How do you maintain it? So you go from mission to formation. That's the bean counters. And then after you get past the formation, then you have to establish your protocol, your procedures, standard operating procedures, standard operating guidelines, whatever you choose, procedure or more stringent than guidelines. And that's where a lot of teams fail, is they set up these very stringent procedures that they just can't follow all the time. They've got to break by virtue of what they're doing. But if you have standard operating guidelines, you have that flexibility of doing what you need to do. Then after you establish those 3 things, then you start team selection.
So before you even get to, and this is where people miss the mark. They're like, we talked about in the first time you were here on the podcast about I have tank, will dive. I was a Navy diver or I was a sport diving instructor or something, and they're selecting the person before they even start the mission.
That's absolutely right, and that is so wrong. Again, diving is diving is diving. However, you've got to have those knowledge, skills, and I call them attitudes rather than abilities, because going where we need to go as public safety divers, as special response divers, is you're going where no one else wants to go.
Right.
We have. I've got one valuable story on that. Is this guy's fishing on the side of the canal, and his Jeep backs into the water. So he immediately gets on the phone and he calls his best buddy, who's a PADI instructor, and the guy comes out as I'm getting there because it's already come through the media and everything's car in the canal. And I get there and he says, "No, my car's in the canal. I called my best friend. He's a dive instructor. Blah blah blah." And so I just, stand back and say, okay. So the instructor shows up. Within a few minutes, he's all dressed and everything. His very first question is, well, where's the car?
Famous last words.
And fortunately, I'm there. I'm saying, well, you see those bubbles coming up over there? That's usually a telltale sign that the car is down there. He says, oh, okay. He gets all suited up. He swims out there. He drops down, and within just a few seconds, the guy bursts out of the water, mask coming up to the forehead, regulator out of his mouth. And he's like, it's dark down there. And I'm like,
surprise.
Well, what did you expect? He says, no, I can't do this. I'm not going to be able to do this. And he leaves.
Man.
And then I had to go in and find the car, hook up to the car, and wait for the wrecker to get there and pull the car out and everything.
I've had so many people that I've, even here, just saying, scuba instructors, be like, hey, you should come on this dive because they're interested in what we do to find things or go look for cars or whatever. And they're like, no, I'll never get in those canals. Like I'll do anything, but I will not get in those canals or in that it's not even zero visibility. It's just low visibility.
That's correct.
And I'm talking and we'll get into definitions of that another time, but low visibility is like 10, 15 feet and they don't, no.
That's correct.
Thank you. Anybody out in the Midwest who's listening, who's like, yeah, that's our normal lakes. That's a great day. But
yeah, if I could see my hand in front of my face, I'm in good diving water.
And that's how we see it. So we got this mission that we need to start with. we teach this in our special response diver course, and just we start from the beginning, how to get this mission in. What does some of those look like? What are some of the best missions that you've seen or helped develop with departments that it just what makes it work?
Well, the mission has to have some sort of a statement to it. And the easiest is we're surrounded by water. Therefore, we want to have a dive capability within the police department. And then from that, you expand. We have canals, we have lakes, we have recreational areas. Recreational areas are like big. You need a dive capability.
Yeah, anywhere with a lake that's got a swim area.
If it's got water, you need divers. Even if the water's 4 feet deep,
Right.
you need divers. You're going to have to put divers in the water. It's the boots on the ground.
Right. So we've got a team that's getting, all right, we've got our mission, we've got our reason for existing, and then the departments, a lot of times, they just kind of quickly jump back to the formation, or they skip the formation, they jump back to the personnel and the team selection.
Yep.
And what'll happen is they'll say, all right, we've got a reason. Somebody prominent had an accident, lost something, a drowning, a major crime happened, and they threw a gun in the water. And they say, we need a diver, because we hate having to call the county, or we don't want to, we've got all this water and we're not doing anything. And so they see the need for it. But so one of the things we coach and consult with other teams is when you create that mission, you not only need to be specific about here's what it is, like you're saying, a statement, but you also have to be specific about what kind of team this is going to be. Because you've said this for decades, but rescue sells. And when you're talking, before you even get into formation of the numbers, you got to come up with the money somewhere. So rescue sells, but recovery is what it really is.
That's 99% of what dive teams are going to do. They're going to go in the water, search for something, and recover it.
That's why fire departments always get the money.
You're right. Fire departments get the money. Miami-Dade Fire Department, I think, has the largest contingent of divers, and it's as a result of a diver drowning. Mm-hmm. A diver that went out on a call. He wasn't supposed to be in the water, but in the excitement and not keeping track of who's who with 3 different units on the scene, he got in the water and he ended up getting trapped underwater and he drowned. He was on a snorkel. And so
that was back before they had the scuba capability.
That's before Miami-Dade Fire Department really had a great capability. But because of the death of the firemen, money started coming in. Money started coming in, and they basically just had all the money in the world they could want.
Right.
And they developed their training and everything, and it lacked a lot.
Now, we've got mission. We're going to go into formation. The formation side, you were dealing primarily with these teams pre 9/11, and then after 9/11, a lot more money became available to teams to be able to start a dive team, because then you also had this homeland security level of capability. Even local smaller departments around the country were getting funding and grants and all that kind of stuff. But the rescue side is even now, like now we don't have that kind of just open the floodgates, money's everywhere. A lot of departments struggle with that big time. And so I know you and I have talked to a lot of departments over the years where they have this huge need. They have a great mission. They just can't get the funding. And so one of the things that we've said is, well, sell it as, it doesn't matter if it's always going to be a recovery. Still sell it as a rescue team, because that's what gets funding. No donor from the community is going to be like, yeah, I want to fund something where we're always recovering them after they're dead. Like that it doesn't matter if that's the reality. You've got to be able to be smart enough to sell it to get the funding, because ultimately you're going to do what needs to be done. Rescue happens if you're there on the water's edge and you see it. And I know there's about 1,000 stories out there where people have just happened to be driving their car and their police car or the fire truck or whatever, and they're seeing somebody go into the water in a car, or they're watching somebody drown, or they happen to be within a minute from there and they were able to recover and resuscitate the individual. And that happens, but disproportionately, the amount of drownings that are recoveries and not rescues. I mean, it's disproportionate. It's crazy, but that's the reality of what it is.
Well, even a recovery, technically, or even a rescue is a recovery.
Right.
So it's all underwater search and recovery. The problem is when you introduce rescue mindset into an environment where you really got to do it by the numbers.
Yeah.
You got to slow down a little bit. You read about public safety divers getting hurt or drowning or dying and everything because they go where no man wants to go, but they do it without thinking through let's go through A, B, C, D.
Sure.
And that's where recovery diving is. You got A, B, C, D, E. Rescue diving, you jump to D because it's like, we got to get in there and get the person out and get,
Yeah.
Well, there's a process to finding. You got to find the person. You got to get into the car. You got to get under the, It's not just as simple as you think, like, okay, the car went in here. We're going to go and pull the guy out.
Right.
You may not be able to. You may have to pop a window out. You may have to get through another entry. You may, just
or the car's
any
upside
number of
down,
things.
sunk in the mud.
And you've got to make sure the car is safe for the diver to go in. Rescue doesn't really count all that. But also what rescue does is for investigations where there's a death or something in a car, the police want to know, was it in drive? Was it in park? Was it in second gear?
Right.
Were the keys in the ignition? Was it on? All of these things. Well, the rescue diver getting into that car and bumping around and moving things around after the investigation starts is like, well, we found it in neutral. Or we found it in park. Why was it in park if it went into, Well, there's a little story there. Most people are so used to putting their car in park. When they park their car, they will literally drive into a canal and put their car in park and get out of the car. It's just, it's a natural thing.
Yeah.
This little old lady, she was like 80 years old. She backed out. She put it in reverse instead of drive and backed into a canal right behind a farm store. And she was able to get out. But her car was in park and her purse was in her arm.
Just because this is my natural.
That's what she does all the time.
Getting out of the car. Yeah. Doesn't matter if the car is filling up with water, but that's just the way it is. So grab all my stuff and go.
They're methodical.
Yeah.
People are methodical. And that's how public safety divers have to be. Special response divers, they have to be methodical in their approach.
So we've got our mission and we've got just a clear declaration of why we exist. And then they get into the formation. And part of that formation is I want to get a team together, and they're always going big. Like they go for the fences. Like we need 20 people and we want to do all this stuff. And that's where sometimes the teams don't even get off the ground because they're like, well, we can't fund that. That's just completely unrealistic. But Miami-Dade County has forever run the team as a, basically 4-man team with a sergeant, right? So you got two dive buddies and a sergeant that are running. And from that, they have been successful. And no matter the size, I mean, the counties, they got more waterways in that county than any other county, I think, in America. And yet all these teams are like, well, we need 10 people or we need wherever for like one lake. But the reality is you just need to keep it small. And let's just run these numbers. Let's say you have a 2-man team. And doesn't matter if you're a firefighter or a police officer, you're going to have to pay them extra in some way, shape, or form. But what they do is they'll say, now let's add on the gear. Okay, we're paying extra for the divers. Now we're getting the gear. We're gonna provide the gear, which I personally think departments should. You should never make your police officers or firefighters provide the equipment.
That's correct because there's a liability there.
Correct. And so you get this equipment add up now with where the price of everything now in 2023 is astronomical. So dive equipment's expensive, quality dive equipment. And then you get into the vehicles, specialized vehicles, or you have to outfit those vehicles to be able to handle cylinders and equipment, and it's not getting overheated and dry rot and all those other factors that come into maintaining equipment well in vehicles. And then you now have to add in the training. So training is actually the least expensive of all of the things
That's
you
correct.
have to have. And
That's
yet
correct.
nobody spends money on it, which blows my mind. We're obviously a training organization, so we believe in it, but it is the least expensive part of a dive team. And then you have that continued training, which never happens. Oh, we went to a pool or we went to this clear lake and that's a whole nother story. But all of this funding has to come from somewhere. They get the funding, it works, but it's a lot of times people are trying to spend too much money because they're saying, well, we need all these people. And if it's too much, they're like, well, let's do a volunteer team. Let's pay this one guy and then have everybody else volunteer, which falls back into one of those traps. You don't have the training available. You don't put on the classes or courses, whatever needs to happen to bring everybody up to speed. So then you have a dysfunctional team because you might have a compelling mission and everybody wants to be a part of it because a drowning happened or something else happened, but nobody's equipped to carry out that mission. So the formation a lot of times won't even get off the ground because they try to get too many people and they don't have the budget, or they misallocate the budget to more gear and no training. And, so then the formation doesn't even, if they're doing it in that order, it doesn't even happen. And now after formation, we get into
procedures.
What are the holdups with that? I mean, there's so many challenges with that, but a lot of it comes down to, well, now we know what a lot of it comes down to, legal, like what's going to get us sued. But where does that line have to be drawn in protecting the divers?
Well, it's really right at the very forefront, but you've got to have a mission. You've got to have a means. That's your formation. And your procedures are how everything works. What kind of training you're going to require? How often is the training going to go? Where are you going to get the training from? Those are the things that procedures work. For example, a very, very serious procedure that I've tried to establish here is, 60 feet is a deep dive.
Right.
All of our people are capable of diving deeper than 60 feet. However, the procedure should be nobody dives 60 feet plus without the diving control board authorizing it. And it's real simple. You just make a phone call and says, look, this dive is going to be 65 feet or 80 feet deep. This is what we're going to do, A, B, C, and D. Okay, it's authorized. Boom. It's real simple. It's not like, but the diver on the scene doesn't have that capability because of the procedure. It keeps your depth to a limit of 60 feet.
Right. And a lot of times what they'll do is people, rarely do these things happen deeper than 60 feet. Just nationally across the country,
correct.
We found
That's
that
correct.
It is very limited. Those are very few instances where this happens at deeper than 60 feet. So you still give a lot of control to the divers on the scene. But at the same time, you've got these dives that are happening also in shallow, which what's the number one thing that people think of as a scuba diver? If you're diving in shallower water, I can stay for
longer.
And
what you need in your procedures is a description of what a dive is. And we've established that a dive should be no more than 25 minutes. That's where the diver and the tender are out of verbal control. Mm-hmm. They're communicating on a line. But at 25 minutes, it's time to come out and regroup.
Regardless of where things are.
Regardless of where things are, you regroup and then establish, all right, I've got another 25 minutes of air plus a reserve. So, okay. Because sometimes you can breathe faster, sometimes you can breathe slower, sometimes it's a partial tank. But most diving accidents in public safety or even fatalities is that lack of communication between the tender and diver. Then the diver's lost. And it just blows my mind how you're working a scene, you're controlling that diver, the tender is, and the diver doesn't come back to the surface. You can't communicate with him, so he came off the line somewhere, and you are searching this river that is a mile long.
Right.
Well, he was lost right here. It's like, again, your procedures have to include how do you conduct searches, how do you do the methodology, those sort of things.
And another benefit of doing a shorter dive time, that's just the standard dive time that can happen with 25 minutes, is that it's an emotional safety barrier too for a diver, because if you're in a much more strenuous condition, whether you have current or you have really cold water, it's 3:00 in the morning and you haven't slept well, or you've had a fight with your wife or whatever, and you're just not in a good headspace, that 25 minutes gives you the ability to say, I'm not here forever. Because that's one of the difficulties of just public safety diving in general when you're doing searches. It's just like, are we going to be here for days, or are we going to be here for minutes, trying to find something? Because you want it to work right away and you're hopeful all the time. But as you're down there sweeping a bottom and you're doing search line patterns, it's that 25 minutes saying, great, I don't have to freeze forever. And you got the media everywhere outside. It's such a morale booster to know, hey, at 25 minutes, I'm coming out of the water and we're going to regroup, and I'm just going, hey, I'm freezing here. I have a 3 mil, I need a 7 mil, whatever that is. Okay, this guy's going to gear up and get in for you, and you're just going to change out. And it's also a way to, if it's part of your procedure, the media is going to, why do these people keep coming out? It's only been like, and they don't stay down there until they find them. And it's, well, our procedure is 25 minutes, and that's for the safety of the divers, for communication. There's so many benefits from little procedures like that people don't think about that.
That's correct. And like I said, we've had fatalities, we've had errors, we've had lost equipment, and all of those things occur because people are so focused on what they're doing and they're not even following the procedures. And that's why you have a tender and a diver. And you've always got a control and a reference. Those are two key terms that you need in underwater search and recovery.
All right, we've got mission, we've got formation, we've got procedures, and now let's talk about personnel.
Personnel or team selection, that's the most critical part of everything. Are the people capable physically, mentally, emotionally to be able to do what they're going to have to be called upon to do?
Because it's public safety diving is a whole nother animal. I mean, people just can't get that it's not just, yes, diving is diving, but there is something, it takes a special kind of crazy person to get in the water and do this.
I had a new diver. He spent 5 years in homicide on the Miami-Dade Police Department. So he's seen everything. Very capable diver. His very first dive was in an environment where the water was crystal clear, but it was full of grass. And he was afraid of alligators.
And we have those down here.
So every time he would move something, searching a bottom, bubbles would come up just out of his sight. And there's an alligator there. And after about 15 minutes, he finally came out. He says, I can't do this. I'm too stressed. And unfortunately for him, we were using what was called a rigid grid. I flipped the rigid grid when I replaced him, and right there, if he had spent one more minute in the water, he would have found his first homicide gun.
Oh, man.
But he just no, I'm just stressed.
And it can be other things, not just the wildlife in the water, which you know how to tell if there's an alligator in the water in Miami is you stick your hand in the water, and if the water's wet, there's an alligator. So
that's correct.
That's your telltale
that's
sign.
Correct.
For those of you who might come and visit down here. But
always remember, though, if an alligator is there and attacks you, fend him off with your right hand.
Why?
Because it's easier to call you lefty than righty.
Oh, my gosh. Dad jokes are coming out here. So aside from the comedy tour that we obviously are not going to go on, you've got other stressors that happen, which it could just be cold water, which is easily fixed with proper equipment. You've got, I think sometimes just the fear of the unknown. We grew up watching Jaws, and we got all these other movies out there, Lake Placid, and stuff that affect us, whether we realize it or not. If you think, I'd never thought about that movie in 20 years. Well, now go dive in some of these areas. You're going to think about that. And it's going to play on you, and there's a lot of rewiring that needs to happen, which can happen on the team. It doesn't need to happen before they even come to team selection, but it does need to happen during. That needs to be a regular part of your training through the process and even after.
Yeah, Ed Zender always had a very, very stringent for any diver. If you don't feel like diving, you don't have to dive. If you just didn't sleep good last night, and you just don't feel emotionally ready to dive, you don't have to dive. He says, however, if you're consistently feeling that way,
there's an issue.
There's a time in which you don't need to be on the dive team.
Yeah.
So it balances out, but the diver has the last word.
Right.
Not the commander on the scene. The diver has the last word because he's the one that's most exposed to the environment and involved in what's happening.
Well, all of this mission, formation, procedure, and personnel, these are the four main things that you need to start a really successful dive team. And it all starts with that mission. It all starts with a compelling vision of why this needs to exist, because that's how you're going to get the funding. That's how you're going to get people that are going to want to say, yeah, I want to be on that team. I want to be a part of this, because it's cool to be on the dive team, but it's better to be on a team that has a reason to exist and serve that community. And that's ultimately what it is. Whether it's fire, police, military even, those teams they're there to serve that community. And so when you think about that with your own team, you've really got to sit down, even if you have a team that's existing. Look at your mission. Do you even have one? Is it just, well, we have water, so we need divers? That's a start. But start to get specific and form that with your team, form that with your administrative leadership in your own department to say, hey, we just want to be really clear of why we exist. Because for dive team leaders, if you're struggling to protect your team from getting defunded or just totally banished from your department, which happens all the time, this is where you start to protect that in the long term. And as you have mayors change over, or commissioners change over, or police chiefs change over, or even battalion chiefs and division leaders within departments, as those people change, make a point to go and say, here's why we exist. Because so many times people will take something, they'll say, all right, we're gonna have this great success, or we have some good recoveries, and we haven't had anything for 2 years. Now we're gonna take this this team that's just kind of been hanging out. You got to find ways to make him proactive. You got to invite people into the story of what's happening with your team and how to help them understand what you're doing and why you need to exist, and invite them out on a dive scene and let them see a training and all that kind of stuff. It's so important to be able to do that.
One of the biggest hindrances is it's called dedicated money from the federal government or from the state or from it. It comes in, and it's usually a lot of money, but it's specifically dedicated. It can't be used for anything else other than ABC. And because of that, these dive teams get started, and they exist for a year. They exist maybe 2 years, but the money stops.
Right.
Then the department never thought through the process. How do we keep funding this thing in the future? And when the money stops, the dive team stops. And when the dive team stops, they get rid of their equipment. When they get rid of their equipment, all of a sudden someone's drowns or someone has a car in the water, and all of a sudden it starts all over again. Again, back to the generational training. And now you've got to train people, because all the people that were your divers, they're scattered throughout the department. Some of them are chiefs and lieutenants. They're not going to be able to go back and teach or anything. And then they start looking for outside sources, and that becomes another whole different story.
Whole thing that affects what you do. Well, what you do is important. The work that you do matters, and we strongly believe in that. And so our goal with this whole podcast is to give you the tools and resources and some more knowledge and a little bit of wisdom from our own mistakes and hard-earned fins on our gear that we just want to give that to you guys. And so thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Special Response Diver Podcast. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.